Thanks so much for joining us today. God wants to do so much for you and through you, and we'd love to hear about it. Take a moment to send your story to stories@parkerhill.org. And if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can do that by going to parkerhill.org/give and choose the giving option that works best for you. Well, thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy today's message.
Well, welcome back to the third part in this teaching series, Flip the Script. My name is Dan. I'm one of the pastors here, and this series, Flip the Script, is all about the lies that we believe and the truth that sets us free. And so throughout this 4 weeks, we're talking about those things in our lives, those things we say to ourselves, the scripts that we live by that are maybe partially true, but not completely true. So your script is the thing you say to yourself and about your life. It runs inside of you like an internal dialogue, and it never stops. That's your script. And here's why this is so important. If your script drives your life and your script is not accurate, then it's locking you up. If lies fill up your script, then you are locked up, but the truth will set you free. And so we're going to talk about a lie that hits home for me personally, and a lie that is close to home for many of you. It's the lie that we believe when life gets a little dark. It's the lie depression oozes. It's the lie that's the most lethal. And it's this one, this lie. You should give up. You should give up. And let me just tell you right up front that this is going to be a little bit intense, and how could it not with a topic like this one? You should give up. And I have two goals as we talk together today. And the first is to help those of you who have never faced depression and this lie to be able to come alongside people who have and understand them and love them well. My second goal is for those of you who have faced and do battle depression, that you would be able to find your way out. That even though we can't cover everything in this talk, I'm hoping that you will hear something that will help you be set on the path to a healthier life. And so today I'm going to share not as a doctor or a therapist or a counselor or an expert. Today I'm going to share with you as a pastor and as a fellow traveler. When we talk about depression in our culture, we're not all talking about the same thing, are we? I mean, in everyday conversation, depression can come up, and it can mean anything on this spectrum, anything from I'm bothered to I'm blank, I'm numb, I don't think I can go on. When we say I'm depressed, we might mean that we're bummed out or blah or blue. It can mean something from that end of the spectrum or this end of the spectrum or anything in between. And so I want to define depression. Depression is a spiritual or emotional fog that stubbornly clouds our hopes and happiness. And there are many things that can lead to depression. A loss in your life, anger that's turned inward towards yourself, the weather, false guilt, true guilt, spiritual attack. And depression, it produces all kinds of these symptoms, more than we have any time to name. Things like feelings of worthlessness and sadness and loneliness and helplessness and irritability and anger and loss of motivation or apathy. And depression is not a small issue here in America. Depression is the leading cause of disability in the United States among people 15 to 44. Depression is the leading cause of suicide. Depression is not the exception, it's to be expected, which means that we all need to be ready to help someone through it or face it ourselves or fight through it right now. See, depression will touch your life in some way. And even though we can't just erase it though we'd like to, we can learn to navigate it well. There are things that we can do that make it worse, and there are things that we can do to make it better. And one thing I love about the Bible is that it's honest about real life. It doesn't shy away from in the Old Testament or the New Testament. In fact, from front to back, woven inside the story of the entire Bible, there are accounts of people who wrestle with dark seasons and dark thoughts. And so to help us learn how to navigate depression, we're going to look at the life of a man in the Bible named Elijah in 1 Kings 19, 1 through 18. You can go ahead and turn there in your Bible or Bible app. And as we dive in today, there's one big thing that you need to know about Elijah. And it's this: Elijah was a prophet, which means he spoke for God. And he was a prophet for God in a time that was dark, where most of Israel had turned their back on God. And the king at this time in history was a man by the name of Ahab. Listen to how he's described in chapter 16, verse 30, where it says, Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. This is one bad dude. And King Ahab, he married a woman by the name of Jezebel. And even if you have never heard this story or read it before, that name comes down through history to us with nothing but bad vibes. And so these two together, both of them, bad news, together their evil is amplified. And so they had led Israel away from God to follow this false god by the name of Baal. Then God wanted his people back, and so he sends his prophet, the person who speaks on his behalf, Elijah, to confront King Ahab. And this confrontation turns into this epic showdown between Elijah and 450 prophets of Baal. And they wanted to prove who was the real God and who was really in charge. And so at the climax of this face-off, God sent fire down from heaven to prove that he alone is God, and God won. And many people turned back to him. And they even chased down the prophets of Baal. They put them to death. This was kind of a spiritual turnaround in the nation's history, at least for some of them. And so much of what Elijah had worked towards was finally happening. It starts to happen right before his eyes. And there on Mount Carmel, where those events took place, Elijah experiences one of his highest moments in life. It's a great victory. But then look at what happens next in 19, verse 1. It says, Now Ahab, that's the king, told Jezebel, that's the queen, everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. And so she sends this very intense death threat. I mean, she has lost some power. She is not happy. And so she says, Hey, I swear, man, I'm going to kill you. Now, did Elijah laugh? Did he say, Did you see what my God did, on Mount Carmel? There's no way that you could touch me. No. In fact, verse 3 tells us this. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. These two experiences, Elijah on Mount Carmel in chapter 18 and Elijah under the broom tree, are set side by side in the Bible because that's chapter 19. So in chapter 18, Elijah is at the height of his success. In 19, he's in the depths of his despair. In 18, he's elated. In 19, he is deflated. Well, what happened? Well, here's what we learn. The first way that you could deepen or make your depression worse is to wear yourself out. The way down is to wear yourself out. And sometimes we are most vulnerable after we are most successful. And so the high of this great accomplishment or this milestone, after we re-enter our normal lives, we can find ourselves crashing down. Elijah went from this super spiritual moment into being suicidal. But consider what Elijah has been through. He had just faced this tense battle over the heart of the nation and the direction that they would go, and that would take a lot out of you. But life was good following that. But then this death threat comes, and he takes it seriously, and so he goes running for his life, and then he crashes under this boom tree. This is a roller coaster emotionally. He's tired, he's hungry, he's emotionally exhausted, he needs a break. And so this is the first thing that you need to consider when you face depression. How's your health? How are you physically? You might be sad because you're physically, mentally, or emotionally worn out. And here's how we know. Notice what God does with Elijah in verse 5. It says, Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep, and all at once an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. See, the first way down is through, wearing yourself out, but the first way out of depression is to take care of yourself, Do you see what God does here? He sends an angel. And angels were usually messengers who would come with a message from God. But he didn't come with a message, he came with a meal. God doesn't give him a pep talk. He doesn't confront him about his despair. He doesn't say, why do you want to die? He doesn't tell him to snap out of it. Instead, he gives him some space and some food to recoup. Then what? God sends him an angel again. And you'll notice an interesting detail mentioned twice throughout these verses, once in verse 5 and once in verse 7. And it says, an angel touched him. And then again, it says, an angel came back a second time and touched him. It's as if to say that God is here. It's like, Elijah, just want you to know I'm here for you. I'm not going to say anything yet. We're not going to try to fix anything yet. I'm just here. It's okay. We're going to get through this. He does all of this without saying really a word about the depression or Elijah's desire to kill himself or to die. God just encourages him to eat, and he sits with him. Why? Why? Because when you feel down, you cannot ignore your body. You're not the Energizer Bunny. You can't keep going and going and going. We have limits, and our bodies will react if we push past those limits without letting up. So if you're sad or feel worn out, look at your life. Are you getting rest? Are you eating well? Are you getting some exercise? Sometimes, one of the most spiritual things you can do is take a nap. Stop trying to do everything. Admit that you're not God and just lay down. No phone, no planning, no distractions, real rest, a real break. See, the first thing you can do to deepen your depression is to wear yourself out, but the first thing you can do to climb out is to take care of yourself. So if your friend is sad, your first response is not to try to talk them out of it. Like, you should be happy because. No, don't even go there. Take your cues from God. Don't try to solve it. Sit with them. But for some of you here today, you've rested, you've adjusted your diet, you've tried all this, and you cannot bounce back. Exhaustion is your constant companion, and you're depressed. And part of considering the biological, your body, this physical side of things, is considering a talk with your doctor about antidepressants. And I know that for some of you, as soon as you hear that, you feel like that's a defeat. Like if you were to do that, it'd mean that you were broken and God couldn't fix it. Like your faith is not strong enough and there's no way out. It'd be like giving up. That's rubbish. You know what infuriates me? If you have diabetes, what does everyone think you should do? What's the message to that person? Change your diet, monitor your health, and take insulin. If you have depression, what does everyone think you should do? What's the message? Get over it. Stop being so sad all the time. If you trust God, you'll automatically be happy. And if you're not, you must not be a very good Christian. I mean, where does this stigma come from? Ignorance. Depression is not just in our heads, it's in our bodies. There are proven biological causes for mood changes. So God did not make us souls and then trap us into a body. He made us body and soul together. And so our solutions must address both the body and the soul. Look, God addresses the biological first. And so that's where we need to start too. Let me explain what I'm talking about. If you haven't ever been depressed, if you're here today, you've never really experienced that deep level of sadness, but you have been discouraged or down at times, then you bounce back by focusing on good things. You feed your mind with truth. And so if that's you might worship, you might read the Bible, you might hang out with friends, and all of that helps you. You fill your life with good things. Before long, you end up feeling good again, and that's great. That's a great way to handle life when you get down. But for a depressed person, it's kind of like this plant. And if it starts to wilt a little, you think, well, maybe it needs more sunlight or miracle grow or some water, and that will help it. And so you pour it into it, and normally it gets better. It gets better. That's great. And so if you, in your life, you've bounced back after pouring some good things into your life, then you can make a mistake. After you empathize with your depressed friend or coworker, you think to yourself, you need to do what I did. You need to pour some good into your life. And when they don't, you assume that it's because they're not pouring enough good into their lives. And then you kind of get annoyed at them and you think, cut it out, or like get over it, or stop wallowing, or you think all you have to do is fill your life with good. That's what I did, and it works. You'll be fine. But here's the difference. The person with depression has a hole in the bottom of their container. And no matter how much you pour into it, it pours right out. The plant will continue to wither. They can read and they can work out and they can spend time with people and they can worship God and they can read his word and still find themselves depressed because as much as they pour in, it pours right out. The problem is not what they're pouring in. The problem is with the container. It's biological. And do you know what the right dosage of prescribed medicine can do? It can plug the hole. It can plug the hole. It doesn't fix everything. And maybe your doctor would have you on it for just a season, but it can level the playing field. You still have to take care of yourself. But now when you do pour in, the plant will grow. See, God made our bodies. And you can make it worse by wearing yourself out, or you can make it better by taking care of yourself. And so what that means for you maybe is that you need a meal, or a nap, or some medicine. That's the biological. Now notice how God interacts with Elijah next, because you're going to see a shift from the biological to the internal. Now Elijah has just traveled 40 days to reach Mount Horeb, and verse 9 says this: "There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" Now, whenever God asks a question, it's not for his benefit, it's for ours. He already knows, and so he's asking it so that we would learn something we don't know yet. And God's goal here with Elijah is to help him question, help him to verbalize his internal dialogue. He asks this question and lets Elijah speak without interrupting. That's how God works this one. God does this 2 times. 2 times he will ask, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" 2 times, Elijah gives him the exact same answer. And that answer reveals Elijah's script. It reveals the internal dialogue that's running nonstop in his heart that is driving him deeper and deeper into depression. And here it is. It says, "And the word of the Lord came to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' And he replied, 'I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty.'" Translation, "I have tried my best. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword." Translation, "I have failed completely. I'm the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." Translation, "I'm totally alone, and there is no hope." This is Elijah's script. I've tried my best. I've failed completely, totally alone, and there is no hope. And if I could summarize Elijah's script in just one sentence, it would be this lie that you should give up. Now you have to ask yourself, as that kind of pours out of Elijah, is it true? Is it accurate? Well, let's look at it. It says, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty." That's true. He's given himself wholeheartedly to the prophet job that he has. Then he says, "The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword." That's true-ish. That has happened, but then there's this big confrontation, and they won, and Israel's kind of turning around. At least some of them are, and so there's something of a revival going on. God's used them in a big way, so it's not completely true. In fact, they're tearing down Baal's idols right now, and they're putting up the ones to God. So what? He can only see part of the story. I'm the only one left. That's false. Elijah knows that there are at least 101 other people who still follow the Lord. He learned that just a few weeks before this. And now they're trying to kill me too, which is false, because Jezebel was trying to kill him, not they, not all the people of Israel, not everyone was against him. This is a perfect example of how our scripts can go. There's enough truth in them to make them believable, but enough lies to make them lethal. Enough truth to convince us, enough lies to immobilize us. See, the second way down is to listen to yourself. Just listen. Twice Elijah says the exact same thing. This script for him is on repeat. It's on a loop, and it keeps going without end. And the longer that he listens to it, the further down he goes. And that's what happens when we listen to our scripts, when we let uncontested thoughts reign in our minds. But notice this: God does not respond with a lecture. It's interesting. He's instead guiding Elijah through a process. And what is that? God leads Elijah to question. his thoughts. See, the second way up is to question yourself, When we question our thoughts, you got to say, well, what are we looking for? And of course, we're looking for lies, but specifically, what? There's something more. And I want you to check out this really cool thing that God does next to show Elijah instead of just tell him. Now, do you remember where Elijah is? It's this mountain called Horeb. And that's not just any mountain. That's the exact mountain where Moses had met with God hundreds of years before, right after they had broken out of Egypt and they had kind of been led through, and they get to Mount Horeb, and there's this great moment of Moses meeting with God. And there on the mountain, there was this fire and cloud and God's glory, and it was kind of this visual display of how awesome God was. And so there was fire and thunder and wind and earthquakes, and all that was to say God is big and he's incredible. Elijah is at that same sacred place, and Elijah knew those stories. And back then, God was in the wind, it tells us, and in the earthquake and in the fire, and so Elijah expected that kind of thing from God. It makes sense. He's done it before. But check out what happens next in verse 11. The angel of the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave, because God was in the whisper. This time, God is not in the wind or the earthquake or the fire. What is God showing Elijah? God is teaching Elijah to examine his expectations. Here he stood at the same place that Moses stood when he got to see the glory of God. In all of those awesome ways, in the fire and the earthquake and the wind. And yet for him, it's a different story. God was working in a different way this time. See, Elijah's script reveals what he was expecting. He had grown up hearing about these great acts of God. He had seen God do incredible things in his life, and so he expects God to do that again. And his script reveals that he expected all of his effort to have a different effect. I mean, he says, I've tried my best. I've failed completely. I'm totally alone. There is no hope. His script reveals that he expected at least for it to be easier, or if not easier, for the results to be better. He expected more from his effort. Expected God to work in a different way. See, the second way to deepen your depression is to listen to yourself, but the second way to climb back out is to question yourself. And when you question your thoughts, you're looking not just for lies, you're looking for your expectations. You're looking for your expectations. And so I want you to think about this two ways. The first question when you're questioning your thoughts is, what was I expecting from my circumstances? What was I expecting from life? Did I really think it was going to be easy? Did I think everything was going to be handed to me? How did I think work was really going to go? How did I think my marriage was really going to go? How did I think life was going to go? Examine your expectations of life. But the second thing, and listen, the second thing is to examine your expectations of yourself. In fact, between the two questions, the expectations of life and the expectations of yourself, the one that drives the most depression is the second one. See, somehow in the mix of things, depression flows out of expectation. We look at ourselves and we expect something different from ourselves. And when we're disappointed with ourselves, then we beat up ourselves. And so you need to question yourself. Like, do you really believe that you're perfect? Well, of course not. Then why are you beating yourself up for every mistake? But do you really think that you would change overnight? No, but I was hoping I would, because I'm upset with myself because I didn't. And what you're feeling flows out of what you are thinking. That's why it's so important to examine the expectations in our script. And one thing I think that would be really helpful to you is to use this free app I found called Dailyo. It will ask you daily, automatically, how you're feeling. It pops up how you're feeling. You pick one. You can name those however you want, or you can use the default. You pick one, then you say what you're doing and what you're thinking at the time, and you're done. And over time, as you use this free app, it's going to build up this picture for you of what's in your script, what's driving your mood. So great resource. You can do it in a notebook if you want, but this Free app is really nice and easy. Maybe you need to check that out. So you can wear yourself out, or you can take care of yourself. You can go down by listening to yourself or come up by questioning yourself. But the third thing that takes you down is to focus on quitting. To focus on quitting. Listen to what happens next in the passage. Verse 15, it says, the Lord said to him, go return on your way. And let me summarize what happens next for the sake of time. God gives Elijah some next steps. Very practically, he says, hey, go anoint two kings, one over Aram and one over Israel, which was like the prophet's job. He's like, go back to work. And then take on an apprentice, because we need to train someone new, because eventually it's going to be their job, which is kind of the prophet's job to do as well. And together you will make things right. And so it kind of lays out a path for him of next steps. And then God drops this fact check in verse 18. I love it. He says, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. He's like, oh yeah, by the way, all right, there are people who have been faithful to me like you. Oh, by the way, you're not alone. In essence, God says, don't believe everything you think, and then go back to work. See, the third way to climb out of depression is just to do the next thing. To do the next thing. Why? Because depression doesn't just go away magically. It goes away gradually. And taking action accelerates that process in your life. And I know you feel like you cannot conquer a mountain. I get that, and so don't try. Just do the next thing. Take out the trash, pray for someone else, walk around your driveway or your neighborhood. Small steps are really healthy. Now, someone who's battled depression a lot in my life, do you know what I find interesting here? What didn't happen? God didn't remove Elijah's depression, but he did give him a way to navigate it. This passage creates this interesting tension for us. God doesn't snap his fingers and make it go away. He walks with Elijah through it. The passage raises an assumption for us that flies in the face of depression and the lies that it tells us. An assumption that shouts to us through all of the actions of God. There's an assumption in this text that I want you to see. And the assumption underlying everything that we just saw God do is that you can climb out. See, the lie is that you should give up, but the truth is you can climb out. The lie says you failed, you're a failure. You're lost, there's no way out. You're terrible, and life is not worth living. You cannot win, you cannot change. The pain will never go away. You are alone, so you should just give up. And we buy it. Hook, line, and sinker. That's why this passage is so fascinating. Because God is not saying, pray harder, though praying is a good thing. He's not saying, believe more, though faith is a good thing. God is not saying, it's nothing, get over it. But he is saying, you can climb out of this. You can learn to navigate this. Many have, and you can too. But you know what I've discovered? Many won't. There are 3 eye-opening statistics from National Network of Depression Centers that I want you to see. The first is this: 75% of depressed people believe that they will not recover. 75%. Even though there is evidence that depression is manageable, treatable, and changeable. 65% then will not seek treatment, even though it's available. And so even though 80% who are treated show signs of improvement in 4 to 6 weeks just after starting treatment, they don't get there because they believe they will not recover. They don't seek help, and so they never get what's available to them. Is that crazy to you too? Believing the lie produces behavior that leaves you in chains. You never get here. You never get free. Why? We've bought the lie. We have learned helplessness. There's 2 scientists by the name of Martin and Steve. A long, long time ago, they discovered something they later termed learned helplessness. when conducting an experiment on German shepherds, which I would not recommend. They divided the dogs into 3 groups. And so the first group, they placed a harness on a dog, they would give them electrical shock, and then with that, they would give them a lever that they could push on that would make the shock stop. The second group of dogs, they placed in an identical harness and they gave them the same lever and the same shock, but with one catch. Even if they pushed the lever, it wouldn't do anything. It would make the dog powerless to do anything about the electrical shock. Group 3, they were placed in the harness, not given a shock. They were the control group. Now, each dog was then placed into a large box with this low divider in the middle. One side of the box produced the electrical shock, the other side did not. One side would zap you, the other side is safe. As one author recounts the results, they put it this way. Then something interesting happened. The dogs that had been able to stop the shock or had not been shocked at all in the earlier part of the experiment quickly learned to step over the divider to the side without shocks. But the dogs that had been powerless in the last part of the experiment did not. These dogs didn't adapt or adjust. They did nothing to try to avoid getting shocked. Why? They didn't know they had any choice other than to take the shocks. They had learned helplessness. And that's why what God does with Elijah is so hope-filled and helpful. Because depression is not the end of the story. God doesn't act like it is. He just acts like, you can get out of this, Elijah. We can get through this. You can climb out. Yes, it's painful, and I know, I have felt it too. Yes, it feels like it will never go away. I know, I have thought that too. Yes, it doesn't make any sense. I know, I've been there, but you can climb out. As I said in the beginning, my goal is to help you understand depression or work through depression. So maybe as you've listened, you realize your next step is to take care of yourself or to question yourself or do the next thing. Maybe your next step is to download that app or talk to a doctor or counselor. Why not? I mean, your health is largely in your hands. You can climb out. The lie, you should give up. The truth, you can climb out. In conclusion, I want to leave you with a final thought. And this thought is for my people, for those facing ongoing battles with depression. And maybe you've even been clinically diagnosed as depressed. You're more than down or discouraged. And I know what can happen when I say to you that you can climb out. It becomes this weight that pushes you further down. Because if you could just get out, if it was actually possible, then who do you have to blame for still being stuck? You blame yourself, which is that anger turned inwards, which is the cause of your depression to begin with. So you start blaming yourself or others, or you might even get mad at me for saying it. It's like the difference between a credit card and a debit card. See, the credit card, you know how this works, right? You can swipe it even if you don't have the money, but later you'll be crushed by the debt. Now, this is a debit card, right? You can swipe it, and it only works when there's money to back it up, and so the cost is covered. And imagine for a second that I told you, you go to Disney World, right? Have the time of your life. Stay as long as you want. Stay wherever you want. Buy as much as you want. Just get on a plane and do it. And right about the time that you're getting excited because I'm offering you this trip, I say, and put it all on your credit card. You would say, no, like I can't afford that. The weight of that would crush me. And if I were to insist, no, go do it. Go try it out. You would get angry with me because you know you can't pay for that. But imagine that I told you to go to Disney and I told you to stay wherever you want, stay as long as you want and enjoy as much as you want. And then I said, hey, take my debit card. There's $1 million on there. You can spend as much of it as you want. You just go. You wouldn't get angry at me if I insisted that you just go. You would get excited. You wouldn't get angry. You would start planning. And if we buy the lie that it's hopeless and there's no way and we should just give up, we're living from a credit mentality. And we think that's all we have. And so when someone says, you can climb out, you think, what a jerk. But when someone says to you, you can climb out, and here's why. Here's why you can have a debit mentality. The glorious truth that Paul talks about in Ephesians 3:8 is this. He says, although I am less than the least of the Lord's people, this grace was given to me to preach to the Gentiles the boundless riches of Christ, the boundless riches of Christ, the bottomless treasure, the limitless resources, the full bank account of Christ. Every Christian has access to all of these riches. You have been given a debit card with a limitless amount. You've been given everything that you need in Christ. So don't get angry. Get busy climbing out.